There's something about silence that turns from comforting to suspicious when it lingers too long. That night, as I sat hunched over my dining table, papers spread like a jigsaw I never meant to solve, I realized the quiet had overstayed its welcome. My apartment in Austin had always been my sanctuary, my clean lines and muted tones a gentle reprieve from the chaos of family. But on that particular night, the shadows clung tighter to the walls, as if waiting for me to figure out something they already knew. I'd pulled out the estate binder again, not because anything had changed, but because something had started to itch. An unease I couldn't name. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was that voice of my mother echoing from the past. Don't ever assume they'll look out for you just because they share your blood. I hadn't thought of her saying that in years, but suddenly, it rang like a bell in my memory, clear and unmistakable. Sorting through the legal folders she'd left behind was like wading through someone else's life. Most of it was familiar: insurance documents, utility records, a copy of her will that had been read in the lawyer's office after her passing 5 years ago. But one label caught my eye. Photo archives, personal. It didn't belong with the rest. No tabs, no index. Just a battered envelope tucked in behind a folder labeled Utilities, 2019. I opened it. Inside were old snapshots. My mom gardening, me with muddy hands beside her, Amaranta in her first prom dress, Dad grinning at a barbecue. Nostalgic, but nothing new, until one photo slipped loose and a piece of folded yellow paper dropped out. My hands stilled. The paper felt delicate, like something that had waited far too long to be read. In her unmistakable handwriting, it read, Dimity. If you're reading this, then I didn't get to explain everything. There's a secondary account at First River Bank. It wasn't mentioned in the will, account number ending in 4127, in case they try to take what's yours. I stared at it for so long my coffee went cold. A separate account. Why not list it in the estate documents? My mind ran in circles, trying to reconcile the woman who raised me with the strategist who wrote those words. It didn't add up, and yet it made perfect sense. I spent the rest of the night rereading the note, comparing her signature on the letter to documents in the will. It matched every loop and slant. She meant for me to find it. Eventually, I couldn't sleep. By morning, I was parked outside First River Bank before they even opened. The lobby smelled like lemon polish and unasked questions. I approached the counter, the paper folded neatly in my coat pocket. I'd like to inquire about an account that may have belonged to my late mother, I said. My voice didn't tremble, but my fingers wouldn't stay still. The teller, a young man with apologetic eyes, glanced at the paper, then typed for what felt like hours. "One moment, ma'am." He returned with a manager, a woman in her 50s who looked like she'd seen her share of bad days. She ushered me to a private room and gently explained that the account did exist, but had been closed. 3 years ago, she added, with a pause that said she didn't like what came next. All funds, just under $3 million, were withdrawn via authorized power of attorney. The air drained from the room. I blinked, trying to make sense of her words. Authorized by whom? She hesitated. Your father, Basia Norwood. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, lips pressed so tightly they felt bloodless. It wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal wrapped in legal language. I hadn't even known the account existed, and somehow he had the authority to empty it. The ride home felt longer than usual. Traffic was a blur. My thoughts scattered, colliding with memories of Sunday dinners where I sat silent while Amaranta talked about her latest brand deal and Dad toasted to family first. All while I cleared the dishes and bit my tongue. I thought of Sophrona, my father's second wife, with her high collars and sharp eyes. She'd stepped into Mom's role so quickly it made my head spin. And people praised her for it. They said she was graceful. They said she held the family together. No one asked who she held it together for. That evening, I poured myself a glass of water and pulled out the will again. I read every word. Nothing about that account, nothing about that money. And now I had to ask, what else had been conveniently omitted? A knock on the door snapped me out of my spiral. It was nothing, just a delivery for a neighbor, wrong address. But it was enough to remind me that life outside my apartment hadn't stopped. Later that night, unable to sleep, I called an old friend. Melissa, now working in financial compliance. She owed me a favor, and I was ready to collect. I need help, I told her, keeping my voice low. My mother left something out of her will, and someone, my father, got to it first. She didn't hesitate. Send me everything. I'll see what I can find. I clicked open the encrypted backup I'd saved years ago from the estate lawyer's office. It was mostly digital copies of what I already had, except for one file buried under layers of folders. Amendment B, Secondary Asset Transfer, unfiled. My stomach dropped. I double-clicked it, but before the document could load, my screen flickered. Then everything went black. I stared into the sudden darkness. No lights. No hum from the fridge. Power outage. Maybe. Or maybe something else. I stood slowly, my phone flashlight barely illuminating the room. My hand brushed against the matches on the counter. As I struck one, I said aloud to no one in particular, "That money was mine. I just didn't know it." Yet, the moment the power flickered back to life, I sat motionless, staring at the now blank screen. My heart was still racing, my pulse thudding hard enough to feel it in my throat. I didn't believe in coincidence, especially not now. Whatever had just happened, I wasn't chalking it up to a faulty circuit. I jotted a note to check the building's breaker panel later, but the real fire had already been lit. If my mother's unfiled amendment was real, and that account truly existed, then someone had deliberately buried it, and I was starting to suspect who. By the next morning, I had cleared my calendar and poured myself into the one thing I knew how to do better than anyone else in the family: track paper. I pulled the estate binders down from my bookshelf and set them beside the legal files stored digitally on my encrypted drive. Page by page, I combed through signatures, notarizations, file logs. It didn't take long before the irregularities started surfacing. Documents supposedly signed on dates that didn't align, pages missing witness signatures, scanned files that looked altered, like someone had overwritten text, then reprinted to appear original. And there it was, Amaranta's name, listed as a witness on a document she'd once sworn she had no knowledge of. A declaration dated just 2 weeks after our mother's passing, granting our father extended authority over estate-related decisions. My stomach turned. Either she was lying or someone was using her name without consent. Neither possibility made me feel any better. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. Sophrona had access to all of this. She'd remarried my father before my mother had even been gone 6 months. At the time, people said it was fast, but grief makes people irrational, right? I hadn't questioned it then. Now, I was questioning everything. Later that afternoon, I drove to Fort Worth without calling ahead. The suburban estate loomed familiar, but no longer warm. When I rang the bell, Sophrona answered, her expression instantly morphing into a hostess's smile. "Well, look who decided to stop by," she said, stepping aside. "Come in, sweetheart. Can I get you something? Coffee? Tea?" "I won't stay long," I said, my voice steady. "I just had a few questions about Mom's estate." Her smile didn't budge, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "Of course, let's sit." The kitchen was immaculate, as always. She poured chamomile into 2 matching mugs, hers with a hint of lemon. We sat at the marble island, the same one where I'd eaten Sunday pancakes a lifetime ago. "I found a note Mom wrote," I began. "It mentioned a secondary account at First River Bank, the one that's missing $3 million. She didn't flinch. She sipped her tea. "Your mother never really understood money," she said after a pause. "That account was always handled differently." "What do you mean by handled differently?" I asked, setting down my mug untouched. She folded her hands. "It was never meant for you, Dimity. Not everything has to go through the will. Some things are spoken. Understood." "That's convenient," I said, leaning back. "So you're saying my mother wrote a note in her own handwriting, listing an account number, and you're telling me it's a misunderstanding?" Sophrona gave a soft laugh. "Honey, you always saw ghosts where there were none. Maybe grief is distorting your memory." I stood. Maybe gaslighting me only works when the lights stay off. I left before she could reply, walking past the living room's family portraits, none of which included me. That night, back home, I opened my phone to unwind, only to feel the sting of something far more personal. Amaranta had posted a story, champagne flutes clinking at brunch, her caption bright and cutting. Cheers to women who don't need to dig for attention. Below it, Sofrona had shared a news article on estate disputes caused by emotional instability and entitlement, tagged "Our family matters." No names, just enough implication. I stared at my screen, not moving. They weren't just ignoring me, they were preparing to discredit me. I didn't comment, I didn't text, I took screenshots, dates, timestamps, IPs if I could get them. They wanted to play a game of narrative? I'd write the ending myself. Still shaken, I poured myself a glass of water and sat down with a yellowing envelope I'd kept in my nightstand. Inside was a small recording chip, part of a voice message Mom had left me 2 weeks before her death. I hadn't listened to it since. I plugged it into my recorder. Her voice crackled through the speaker, soft but resolute. Dimity? Not everything is love, and not everyone is fair. You already know that. But what I leave behind, it's yours. If you choose to fight for it, you don't have to prove yourself to anyone. Just don't let them convince you you're wrong for wanting what's yours. I paused the recording. The world shifted. That old doubt, the one they'd planted in me every time I asked a question, challenged a decision, refused to play the quiet daughter, lifted. She knew they'd try this, that they'd charm and connive and manipulate, and she trusted me to see through it. I picked up my phone and dialed Aisling. You still have those contacts in estate law? Her voice warmed. You ready to dig? Past ready, I said. I sat at my laptop and opened the last financial file I hadn't checked, transaction history tied to the primary estate. It was a web, but not a complicated one. Transactions made within weeks of Mom's funeral, large sums, gradually reduced. All marked as authorized, names listed on each authorization. Batia Norwood, Sofrona Norwood. There it was, $3 million, vanished under my nose. I hit print on every page and watched the stack grow beside me. I held the final sheet in my hands, the ink still warm. Let's see how they spin this, I said aloud, more to myself than anyone. Because if they were going to gaslight me, I'd better be holding a torch. The next morning, I took my coffee black and bitter, appropriate, considering what I was about to do. I called Aisling before sunrise. She answered groggily, still half asleep, but her voice softened as soon as she heard mine. You okay? She asked, not out of habit, but because she meant it. Not even close, I replied. But I'm not calling to vent. I need help. Aisling connected me with her friend Neil, who worked in probate administration. A man in his 40s with a reputation for discretion, Neil met me at a quiet corner booth of a downtown cafe 2 hours later. I handed him my mother's letter and the screenshots of the transactions I'd uncovered. He didn't waste time. This kind of thing happens more than people realize. Families weaponize grief like it's currency. I'll file a request for sealed probate archives. But if we find anything out of place, you'll need a lawyer who doesn't blink. I nodded, then added, if what I think is true, someone's been rewriting history, and they did it with my name. That same evening, Neil emailed me a scan of a document that wasn't part of the final estate packet. Found it, he wrote. Amendment B. Never filed. Dated day of funeral. You sure you're ready for this? I opened the file and stared at the heading. Voluntary relinquishment of secondary assets. Dimity Norwood. According to this, I had signed away all rights to the hidden account, voluntarily. No dispute, no contest. The date? The same day my mother was buried. I remember that day with painful clarity. I'd barely spoken. My father and Sofrona handled everything. I was ushered from room to room. People hugged me like I was a guest at someone else's tragedy. I never sat down long enough to think, let alone sign something legal. My stomach turned as I scrolled through the signature at the bottom. It was my name, yes, but the shape of the letters, the flow of the pen. It wasn't mine. I knew it the same way you know your own voice in a crowd. I forwarded the document back to Neil. Is it forged? Want the truth or the legal answer? He replied an hour later. Truth, it's not you. Legally, it's enough to raise suspicion. You'll need a handwriting expert and a lot of nerve. It was hard to tell which of the two would cost more. The next morning, I printed my real signature on several documents, then held them beside the forgery. Even the pressure of the pen was different. Where I looped lightly, this one pressed heavy, assertive, like someone trying too hard to fake confidence. I wasn't surprised when I saw Amaranta listed as the witness again. I wanted to believe she didn't know, that maybe she'd signed something without reading, or had been manipulated. But a pattern was forming, and patterns don't lie. They only wait to be noticed. With each new sheet of evidence, my tolerance shrank. I opened a new binder, labeled it Evidence Master, and began inserting every anomaly, every inconsistency, date by date, page by page. This wasn't just about a bank account anymore. It was about rewriting reality. Later that afternoon, I returned to the scanned files Neil had provided. I zoomed in on the corner of one photocopied estate record. Something faint caught my eye. A pencil note, barely legible, in rushed cursive. Sophrona instructed filing delay. Hold until post-cert. My breath caught. Someone on the inside had left a breadcrumb. A legal assistant? An intern? Whoever they were, they'd scribbled a piece of truth in the margins. I took a screenshot, printed it, circled the note in red, sent it back to Neil. He called immediately. "That's not just a mistake," he said. "That's intent." If she directed someone to hold it back from court, that's a whole different game. You realize, right? This might not be the first time she's done something like this? "I figured," I said quietly. He was silent a beat. "You okay?" "No," I answered. "But I'm ready." I stayed up past midnight creating digital backups of everything I'd collected, labeled each folder clearly, time-stamped every scan. Then I composed an email to Odelia Gaines, a lawyer in Dallas known for taking down families who thought wealth gave them immunity. Subject line: Estate Interference, Confidential Inquiry. I attached the binder files, the pencil note, the voice recording from my mother, and a short message. "I believe the estate was manipulated by my father and stepmother. I have documentation, timelines, and witnesses. I'm ready to fight back." Before hitting send, I felt a buzz. My phone lit up with a text from Amaranta. "You're not seriously dragging us through this, are you?" I stared at her words. Short, casual, as if we were talking about brunch plans, not fraud. My thumbs hovered above the screen. I typed, "Watch me," then deleted it. I said nothing. The next morning, as the sun crept through the windows, I walked past my mother's photo, the one I'd framed just weeks after her funeral. She was smiling at the camera, the way she always did when she thought no one was watching. That smile wasn't joy. It was defiance. I stopped in front of it, met her gaze, and whispered, "I'm going to finish what you started." I picked up the binder from the table and closed it with both hands. The sound echoed in the apartment like a judge's gavel. Let's see how they handle a daughter who remembers everything. I spent the entire morning surrounded by stacks of paper and the low whir of the printer, printing page after page of evidence, signatures that didn't match, financial authorizations that screamed foul play, timelines that lined up too perfectly with moments I was grieving, moving, or just trying to breathe. I used yellow highlighters for names, red pens for dates, sticky tabs for inconsistencies. By the time I closed the last binder, my fingers were smudged with ink, my living room looked like a crime scene, and my mind was clearer than it had been in months. That binder, it wasn't just evidence, it was a map of betrayal. Every document pointed to the same truth. They didn't just wait for me to be distracted, they engineered my distraction. The funeral, my leave from work, my time in therapy. Those moments when I was too vulnerable to challenge anything, that's when they struck. I wasn't just left out, I was pushed aside. Calculated, deliberate, and dressed up in the language of concern. I zipped the binder into my leather case and stood, stretching the tightness from my back. There was only one place left to take this, home, or what used to be. Dinner at Dad's wasn't something I agreed to lightly. When Bashia texted saying, "Let's just talk like family," I almost laughed. But something told me he wanted to gauge how much I knew, and I was more than happy to show him. I wore my sharpest blazer, tied my hair back, kept my face neutral. When I pulled into their driveway, I took one long breath before stepping out. The porch light flickered as I rang the bell, the same way it always had. Sophrona opened the door, smile stretched tight like an elastic band. "Dimity, how nice of you to join us. Come in, sweetheart." "Thanks, I won't stay long," I said, walking in. Amaranta was lounging at the kitchen island, sipping something pink from a wineglass. She looked me up and down and snorted. "Didn't realize we were dressing for court." I didn't respond. Dinner was set with too many candles. The kind of lighting that's meant to soften tension, but only casts longer shadows. We sat. Sophrona ladled stew into bowls like we weren't about to go to war. Baisha cleared his throat. "We've been worried about you. This whole digging through the past thing, we're just trying to protect what's best for the family." I set my napkin down. "Including hiding estate accounts? Forging my signature on legal documents?" Silence fell like a guillotine. Sophrona blinked slowly, then smiled. "You've been going through things, sweetie. It's not unusual for grief to twist reality a little." I reached into my bag and slid a folded document across the table. "This is a copy of a psychiatric declaration you filed on my behalf, without my consent, 3 years ago." Sophrona's smile froze. Baisha shifted. Amaranta took a sip of her drink, eyes darting. I read aloud, "This filing seeks to designate Dimity Norwood as mentally unfit to manage estate-related matters due to emotional instability, irrational behavior, and potential risk to herself and others." I paused, letting the words hang there. "That was never submitted," Sophrona said, her voice low. "Because you didn't need it. Not yet. It was your backup, in case I started asking questions." "You were a mess back then," Amaranta muttered, not even looking at me. "Grief is not madness," I said calmly. "But what you did, that borders on criminal." My father sat silently, arms folded, not denying, not defending. "You stood by while they erased me," I said, locking eyes with him. "Why?" His mouth tightened. "Because you wouldn't have known what to do with it anyway. The punch didn't come with a fist. It came with that sentence. I didn't flinch. What I didn't know then, I know now." They had used my silence as evidence, my absence as proof of incompetence. Every time I didn't show up, didn't ask, didn't fight, it was logged as weakness. I pulled the binder from my bag and placed it on the table. "These are facts," I said, "not feelings." Inside were signatures, transaction logs, timelines, every manipulation captured in ink and timestamp. I had receipts, and they were shaking. "I've already retained counsel," I said. "You'll be hearing from her by the end of the week." "You'll ruin what's left of this family," Sophrona snapped. I stood. "You already did." I gathered my things. Amaranta said nothing. Baishia didn't even look up. I walked out without dessert, down the hall that used to display my school photos, but now held only Amaranta's graduation portrait and Sophrona's charity plaques. Outside, the air a bit colder than I expected. I got in my car, hands tight on the steering wheel. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one being dismissed. I was the one making the exits. Back home, I opened my voicemail archive and scrolled until I found the message. Mom's voice, saved on a backup server. I hit play. "Don't let them convince you your voice doesn't matter." I whispered back. "Not anymore." Then I opened a new message to Odelia. One word. "Ready." By 6:30 that morning, I'd already been up for hours. I couldn't sleep. Not with the things I now knew, not with the binder full of timelines, highlighted statements, and document scans staring back at me like silent witnesses. I had color-coded the entire saga. Yellow for forged records, red for manipulated dates, blue for anything with Amaranta's signature on it. The patterns were no longer subtle. They were coordinated. I paused, flipping through my own texts and emails from those years. "You should take some time off," Sophrona had written after the funeral. "Don't worry about the paperwork. We'll handle everything." Another one from Dad. "No need to stress, sweetie. Amaranta and I already signed the necessary forms. Just focus on healing." It wasn't support, it was strategy. Disguised in affection, their words were carefully designed to keep me out of the loop. I hadn't seen it then. Now it was all I could see. I stared at the last page, my signature, not in my hand, dated 3 days after the funeral. The grief they'd seen as my weakness had become their window of opportunity. And I finally understood the full extent of it. Every time I'd faltered, they moved. Every time I'd stepped away, they had taken something more. I zipped up the binder. My heart didn't race anymore. It pulsed with something else. Clarity. No more waiting. No more hoping they'd come clean. It was time to bring the confrontation to their doorstep. That afternoon, I drove to the house I grew up in. The bricks looked duller now, the lawn too manicured, like someone was trying too hard. I rang the doorbell, binder in hand. Sophrona opened the door, eyebrows lifted. Dimity, what a surprise. I walked past her without speaking. Inside, everything smelled like lemon oil and lavender candles. Artificial warmth. Amaranta descended the staircase in a silk robe, coffee mug in hand. Didn't know we were expecting company, she said, her tone dripping with disdain. I kept walking toward the hallway. I'm here for my room, I said flatly. What do you mean, your room? Sophrona asked. I reached for the doorknob. It beeped. Keypad. Installed recently. My room. Locked. What is this? We had to repurpose the space, Sophrona said, her voice overly casual. Amaranta needed a quiet place for her creative projects. I stared at her. Creative projects, I repeated. You turned my room into a studio and locked it. Amaranta smirked. You haven't lived here in years. No, I said, because I trusted you. All of you. I turned around slowly. We're not going to pretend anymore. Let's all sit. We moved to the dining table, the same one where I'd spent countless meals in silence. I placed the binder at the center and opened it. I know what you did, I began. Every forged signature, every asset transfer, every lie you wrapped in legalese. They didn't speak, so I continued. Here's the psychiatric filing you submitted, without my consent. Dated 3 years ago. Convenient timing, considering the account withdrawal. Amaranta scoffed. You were unstable back then. I looked her in the eye. No, I was mourning, and you used it. Sophrona laughed softly. This is quite the show. I turned to my father. And you? You stood there and watched. His eyes narrowed. You're making this uglier than it needs to be. No, I said. You made it ugly. When you locked my room, you told me everything I needed to know. He slammed his hand on the table. You're breaking this family. I didn't flinch. You broke it the day you decided to erase me. I stood, slowly gathering my binder. I'm not here to ask for explanations. I'm informing you. Legal filings are in process. Odelia Gaines is handling it. You'll be served. You'll burn down everything, Sophrona hissed. I'm just pulling back the curtain, I replied. I walked out, past the staircase, past the room that used to be mine. I didn't look back. Once outside, I sat in my car for a long moment. The air was heavy with the kind of finality you can't reverse. I opened my phone and pulled up the family group chat. Hovered over the screen. Delete chat. Leave group. Done. Driving away, I found myself remembering a time I'd been locked out as a child for refusing to apologize for something Amaranta had done. I'd sat on the front step for hours, knees to my chest, until the porch lights went out. That was the first time I learned silence could be punishment. This was the last time I'd let it be. Back home, I pulled up every file, every scan, every image and video clip, and uploaded them to a secure digital vault labeled War Files. I created backup folders and drafted a press release, just in case. If they tried to smear me publicly, I'd be ready. Later that night, I called Aisling. Her voice was warm as always. Are you sure? She asked. I'm past sure. You know this will get uglier. It already has. She paused. Then I'm here, whatever you need. Thank you, I said. And Aisling, this time, they'll regret leaving me out. The next morning, I reviewed the property deeds, triple-checking everything with Odelia's paralegal. Then I saw it. A filing error. A missing signature in the ownership chain. Something small, something technical, but it was there. I sat back, blinking. Interesting, I whispered. That might just void their entire claim. I scanned it, attached it to an email, and typed the subject line, buried treasure. Then I smiled. I pulled up to the house slowly, the gravel crunching under my tires like bones. This wasn't a visit. It was a reclaiming. I had called ahead, but not to them. The officer waiting by my side was tall, calm, and wore mirrored sunglasses that somehow made everything feel more official. I had rights. That house still held pieces of my life, my mother's legacy, and legal ownership hadn't shifted. Not yet. When Sophrona answered the door, her hand flew to her chest like I'd startled her. "Officer, is there a problem?" she asked, voice syrupy and laced with nerves. "I'm here with Ms. Norwood to retrieve her personal items. She has the legal right to enter," the officer said, steady and unimpressed. "Dimity," she said with a forced smile. "You could have just called." "I tried transparency," I replied. "It didn't work." From the top of the stairs, Amaranta appeared, makeup perfect, robe silk, mug in hand. "Oh God, is this another one of your meltdowns?" The officer didn't flinch. I stepped inside, scanning the hallway. It was cleaner than I remembered, sterile, even, too polished. Something was off. I turned the corner, heart hammering as I headed toward the hall where my bedroom had once been. When I reached it, I stopped. The door was gone. In its place stood a thick white panel door with a digital keypad. I stared at it. No brass doorknob, no scratches from the dog we used to have, no memories left behind, just numbers. "I assume I'm not supposed to have the code?" I said over my shoulder. Sophrona caught up behind me, lips tight. "We had to repurpose the space. Amaranta needed a quiet area. You weren't using it." I didn't know I had to fight to keep what was mine. She didn't answer. The officer took notes, his presence alone pressing down on the atmosphere like gravity. "Is it unlocked?" I asked. After a beat, Sophrona tapped the code. The door clicked. I stepped in. The walls were painted a soft gray now, the floors redone in oak laminate. In the center of the room, beneath a crystal chandelier, sat a crib. White, pristine, matching drawers lined with baby clothes, all with gold embroidery. On the wall, in cursive pink letters, Amaranta's Little Bloom. There was nothing of mine left. My art projects, my desk, the bookshelf with my grandmother's cookbooks. Gone. "I didn't consent to this," I said, barely above a whisper. "You haven't lived here in years," Amaranta chirped from the hallway. "I never signed anything relinquishing the room," I snapped. "You don't need to sign away something you abandoned," Sophrona said. The officer clicked his pen, scribbling silently. "Ms. Norwood, would you like to document missing property?" I nodded. We photographed the space. Every drawer, every corner, every absence. Later that night, scrolling through Instagram, I saw the betrayal unfold in real time. Amaranta had posted a reel titled, "Building Baby's Dream Room." The first shot, her walking into what had been my bedroom. Cut to Basha painting a wall pastel pink, smiling, arms flexing like a proud dad in a furniture commercial. Then Sophrona holding up a baby mobile with exaggerated joy. Caption, "New beginnings in the heart of our home." And there it was, a close-up of the door. My nameplate, once nailed proudly outside that room, was now gone. A clean wall, no trace of the life it once held. The comments were full of heart emojis, blessings, and gushing. I took screenshots, all of it. "This nursery will become Exhibit A," I whispered. The next morning, I sat with Odelia. Her office smelled like old books and freshly brewed coffee. I laid out everything: photos, timestamps, posts, room images. She didn't blink. "We'll file a cease and desist for the online content," she said, "and property tampering. You've got enough to freeze the estate's asset modifications." I nodded. She paused, looked at me. "You're not just angry, you're strategic." They wanted me to be too emotional to fight, but I'm not. I'm methodical now. She nodded approvingly. I started listing everything that had been in the room: jewelry from Mom, my paintings, even a worn denim jacket she gave me in high school. All missing, all replaceable, except for the intent behind their disappearance. Back home, I opened the dummy email I'd created years ago during college to avoid spam. A single message blinked unread. No subject, just an image attachment. I opened it. A still frame from a security camera. Amaranta, in Baccia's office, holding estate documents, dated 6 months before my first inquiry. There was more. A second photo showed her on a call, documents spread across the table. Someone had taken these from inside, someone watching. I typed a reply. "Who are you?" No answer. I sat back, phone buzzing with anxiety. They didn't just erase me, they prepared to discredit me long before I said a word. Before bed, I packed all the files into a courier envelope and addressed them to Odelia, my backup legal contact, and one for myself. In the quiet, I stared at a family photo. The same frame I used to keep on my bookshelf, the same one Amaranta had posed with in her nursery post. Only now, it didn't look like nostalgia. It looked like evidence. I whispered, "I hope that child never learns how cruel a family can be." The walls of the hospital room were a muted beige, but somehow they felt colder than concrete. I blinked up at the ceiling tiles, trying to piece together how I'd ended up there. The nurse said I had fainted, panic-induced. My blood pressure had dropped, my hands had gone numb, and when I hit the floor in my apartment, I must have knocked over my binder because the paramedics had found legal documents scattered like snowflakes. Aisling was there when I opened my eyes. She didn't say anything at first, just gripped my hand like she was anchoring me to something real. No one else came, no flowers, no texts, nothing from my father, Sofrona, Amaranta, just silence, again. When the nurse stepped out, Aisling leaned over. "I checked the intake record," she whispered. "The call came from your father's number. He asked for a psychological evaluation to be included in your chart." My breath caught. "They want a record," she continued. "Something they can use." I stared at the ceiling again, not out of shock. I wasn't shocked anymore. I was calculating. It wasn't just that they'd ignored me. They were building a case, quietly, surgically, and they'd done it before. I flashed back to when I was 9. Stomach virus. I'd cried and called from the nurse's office for hours. No one picked up. I ended up sitting in the hallway with a wet towel on my forehead until a janitor drove me home after his shift. At the time, I'd made excuses for them. They must have been busy. Now I knew better. Back then, they hadn't come because it didn't serve them. And now, they weren't checking on me. They were checking for weakness. That evening, someone slid a sealed envelope under my hospital door. I hadn't heard footsteps, just the shuffle of paper against tile. I opened it carefully. Inside was a printed email from Baccia's lawyer. The subject line: formal notice of intent to countersue. The contents were short, sterile, and venomous. Your client has demonstrated patterns of erratic behavior, harassment, and emotional instability. We are preparing a civil countersuit claiming reputational harm and attempted extortion. I stopped reading. Then I picked up my phone and saw Amaranta's latest post. A photo of her, standing in the nursery, my former room, with her hand on her belly. Caption: "You can't kick someone out of a home they never belonged to." Comments flooded in. "So strong, Mama." "Some people just love drama." "Protect your peace, Queen." They'd gone public. And they were painting me as unstable, angry, bitter. I checked my professional email next, just to feel something normal. But there it was. 2 inquiries from old clients asking if the family rumors had any truth. Someone inside this hospital was leaking my presence. I called Aisling and whispered into the phone, "Get me out of here." By the next morning, I had transferred myself to a private clinic outside Austin under an alias. My name wasn't on any public room chart, and the staff had been briefed. No visitors, no press. Odelia called me on a secure line. "They're not reacting anymore," she said. "They're maneuvering. You need to treat this like war." "I already am," I said. In the quiet of my new room, I installed encryption software on my devices. I updated passwords, locked my cloud drives, and began assembling my affidavit, chronological entries of every manipulation, every forged form, every silence used as proof of incompetence. I wanted to publish it all. Go online, tell my version first. But Odelia reminded me, court first, narrative second. So I waited. I built my list of third-party witnesses, Mom's old accountant, the nurse from the day of my mother's will reading, even Ruth, the janitor who'd helped me that day in elementary school. I had no idea if any of them would talk, but the list mattered. It meant I wasn't alone. Turns out, I wasn't. On the day of my discharge, a quiet woman pushing a mop and bucket paused at my door. She didn't speak. She slipped something into my hand and kept walking. It was a flash drive. I plugged it into my laptop. The file was dated 3 days before my hospital admission. Security footage. There they were, Amaranta and Sophrona, sitting in a staff lounge with the medical administrator. No reason to be there. No scheduled visit. Amaranta laughing, Sophrona gesturing at a file folder, the administrator nodding, signing something. There was no audio, but it didn't need sound. The image said everything. A small note on the drive read, "You're not the first, but you might be the first to fight back." I stared at the screen, breath shallow. For the first time since this all began, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not even rage. Recognition. I wasn't imagining this. I never had been. When I walked out of the clinic that evening, the sun was low, spilling gold across the sidewalk. I didn't wear sunglasses. I wanted to feel it, every inch of it. The heat, the wind, the truth. I rented a small co-working space that night, signed the lease under my new LLC. Norwood Equity Protection. No more hiding, no more reacting. I recorded a voicemail to Baccia. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I said, "You wanted me declared unstable, but I'm the sanest I've ever been. I see through all of it now, and I will never go quiet again." Then I uploaded every file, every photo, screenshot, legal form, and the new footage into a secured cloud drive. I labeled it Phase 2, Retaliation. My final act before midnight, an email to the state licensing board, to the exact administrator in the video. No caption, no threats, just the footage. I blue-booked a call with a mutual friend of ours, someone who still attended cocktail gatherings where polite gossip swirled like wine. When she told me about Dad's upcoming family healing dinner at the estate, my heart sank. That phrase, family healing, was always code for sweeping me under the rug. My name wasn't on the guest list, she said. The narrative being spun was, she's unwell. This is a time to unify. Odelia warned against walking into a trap, but I insisted. I wasn't going to be written out quietly. Not now. That USB in my bag felt heavy. Inside were pieces of truth, hospital footage, Ruth's witness testimony, every thread holding them accountable. I didn't go because I wanted belonging. I went to expose their lies. The house was takeover hotel glamorous, immaculate floors, crystal chandeliers, the scent of fresh lilies meant to soften tension. When I walked in unannounced, conversations dropped mid-toast. Sophrona nearly choked on her wine. Amaranta's breath hitched, front and center. Dad stood tall, face like granite. There were relatives, neighbors, even a few church friends who nodded awkwardly as I passed. The hush made me bold. I stepped into view, pressed the USB into the TV port. Pictures flickered onto the screen, 2 silhouettes in a hospital hallway. Amaranta leaning into the administrator, Sophrona's lips moving silently. Frame by frame, the evidence played itself cleanly. I leaned toward the quiet. "Before you paint me as the villain," I said, steady but loud enough to echo. "Let's see what brushes stroke you used." A wave rippled through the room. Some guests edged away, jaw slack. Weight settled in the air, heavy with shock. Sophrona's lips parted, but she recovered with a false sweetness. "This is absurd. A family matter." I shook my head, tone calm. "Then why involve hospital staff and legal systems? Why stage it?" I caught Amaranta's eyes and saw panic bloom. Her bravado dwindled. She hadn't known the camera was rolling. Basia's laughter leaked from his throat, without humor. "You're a disgrace," he blurted, voice low but venomous. "Ungrateful. You destroyed us." His words were meant to cut. I let them bruise. Then I spoke louder. "Silence made this possible. Only when no one said anything did you get away with all of it. So let's try something louder." I pulled crisp documents from my purse, greens and deep navy letterheads, embossed. I handed one to Dad, one to Sophrona, one to Amaranta. Eyes followed. I watched them because they all knew what moment this was. "These are not requests," I said. "These are legal notifications. Odelia prepared them, and they land today. We're not fighting over memory, we're fighting over the truth." The room shifted. I quoted softly, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." Maya Angelou. But it fit. I spoke not in anger, but in a certainty deeper than any court statement. Heads turned. Phones were pulled from pockets. Some whispered, "I always suspected." One elderly aunt brushed my shoulder and said quietly, "Your mother would be proud," as if passing a torch. I felt the memory of her support, her vigilance wrapped around me like a soft coat. No one applauded. There was no relief. But I walked toward the doorway, knowing I'd seized that moment and made it real for everyone, including the ones too tight-lipped to speak. I left quietly, shoulders squared, as the weight of their gaze followed me out. Outside, the spring air held a breeze sweet as oak. I sat in my car, allowing it to wash over me. Then my phone buzzed. A news alert. Anonymous footage posted under "Heiress Fights Back, Hospital Manipulation Exposed." The clip matched my evidence. I hadn't posted it, but someone did. They lit the spark, and now the whole state knows. I leaned back into the seat and tasted something sharper than victory. Real change. I woke up to a dim morning light slipping through the curtains, but it wasn't the sunlight that stirred me. It was the ceaseless buzzing of my phone. The screen flashed like a warning beacon. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of unread messages, my name plastered across every local news outlet. Headlines blared. Leaked hospital footage sparks outrage. Fairborn family faces, unprecedented lawsuit. Inside the scandal, what the footage reveals. Letters danced in front of my bleary eyes like fragments of a nightmare I hadn't yet escaped. The messages from family poured in, none of them kind. "Why would you do this to your mother? Aren't you ashamed? You're dragging the family through the mud. Don't come crying when everyone cuts you off." I didn't respond. I read every angry word, not as condemnation, but as confirmation. They thought I'd crumble, beg for forgiveness. Not this time. For once, I wasn't the silenced one, and now, their world was unraveling. When Odelia called, her voice was steady, almost too calm. "Dimity, are you following what's happening with the family charities?" I sat up, still groggy. "Just hit me with it." The leak triggered a review by the state's financial board. They're now investigating inconsistencies in tax filings under Sophrona's name. It's not looking good. A dry chuckle escaped me. So the castle's finally cracking. That's not all. Amaranta just lost 2 major brand deals. PR firms are pulling out. Nobody wants to be tied to this mess. "It's poetic in a way," I muttered. "She once said I was the family's burden. Now the truth is?" Baccia issued a family-wide statement calling you unstable and reckless, but no one's really buying it this time. I nodded. The vindication didn't feel like triumph. There were no fireworks, no applause, just a hollow space inside me that used to ache. I'd knocked down their walls, but all I could feel now were the ruins. Later that afternoon, I sat across from my legal team as we reviewed paperwork to freeze family assets. One of the attorneys paused, brow furrowed. "This document," he slid it toward me. "Sophrona's name appears as a co-owner of the estate from 10 years ago, but it was never formally registered." I blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means she had her name added, probably with your father's cooperation, but without legal validation. Technically, the signature's real, but without registration, it has no enforceable weight." So she doesn't actually own it? In the eyes of the law, very likely no. I exhaled slowly, pulse pounding. For 10 years, she bulldozed renovations, made decisions, held authority like a queen, and she might not have had a legal leg to stand on. It was manipulation, meticulously disguised as entitlement. They never planned to make space for me, I said quietly. From the beginning, it was always a performance. The next day, I attended a small community event, something we used to show face at, back when the Fairborn name still meant something. I didn't expect applause. I didn't expect confrontation either. But there she was. Great Aunt Margaret, tiny, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, waddled straight toward me with a steel spine only age can carve. "Shame on you," she hissed. "Dragging family dirt into the streets like this. You think this is how loyalty works?" I held her gaze, voice steady. If loyalty means letting them lie, then I was never loyal to begin with. Gasps, whispers. A wave of reaction swept the room. Some turned away. Some watched in stunned silence. One woman, a stranger, touched my shoulder and murmured, "Thank you. You said what needed saying." Later that evening, another blow came. Not unexpected, but still bitter. Amaranta had posted, "She didn't just ruin our family's name," the post read. "She ruined the future of my unborn child. That's what her truth has cost." I dropped my phone. Sat in silence. Alone in my apartment, no lights on, no warmth. The weight I'd carried for weeks finally crushed me all at once. Grief, rage, exhaustion, and still, I didn't cry. Until I asked myself, what would Mom say if she saw all this? The answer came not as a whisper, but as memory. Her handwriting in a note she left behind. "You'll face the truth alone. But don't fear it. Alone is where you'll find your own voice." It didn't soothe me, but it gave me direction. This fight was never about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming something that was mine all along. My name, my truth, my identity. The next morning, I walked out of the community center. The sun was bright, but not warm. My phone rang again. "This is Dimity Fairborn," I answered. A man's voice replied, firm but unreadable. "Ms. Fairborn, I'm with the State Property Investigations Unit. We've uncovered documents related to your mother's estate. Documents that were intentionally withheld from public records." I froze, standing between the sidewalk and the parking lot. My grip tightened. The phone trembled in my hand. He continued, "We believe you need to see them." They built a family on silence, and I shattered it with my voice. By the time the courthouse doors opened that morning, I was already 2 steps ahead of the storm. Odelia's voice crackled through the phone just as I was locking up my apartment. "Dimity, it's official. The lawsuit has been filed. Civil, for now, but there's chatter about criminal charges depending on what we dig up." I tightened the strap of my bag and nodded, more to myself than her. "Let them chatter. It's time they started watching." "They already are," she said. "Law firms are analyzing every move like it's a case study. Media outlets are circling for statements. You're not just a Fairborn now. You're a headline." I paused at the crosswalk. "Good. Let them read." The courthouse was cold, sterile, as though justice could be chilled into something neat and quiet. But nothing about this would be quiet. Not anymore. Betrayal's team had tried to file a countersuit before the ink on mine had dried. It was dismissed within hours. Inconsistent filings, contradictory affidavits, it all fell apart before it touched the judge's bench. What we brought to the table was airtight. Digital forensics, doctored financial trails, time-stamped hospital footage, records buried and unearthed. And for once, the secrets they buried didn't stay buried. The family known for silence was now under fluorescent courtroom lights, and everything they did was on public record. 2 days later, we filed the freeze motion. My lawyer handed over the documents to the judge while I sat quietly in the back, watching as the dominoes began to line up. Every estate-linked account, every parcel of property, every wire transfer, frozen. Sophrona's hands were legally tied. Her lavish renovation projects halted overnight, contracts suspended, checks blocked. Amaranta's social empire, Sponsored posts, luxury partnerships, PR deals, all of it drew red flags the moment auditors saw family trust ties. She went from curated perfection to corporate liability in less than a week. Even Batia wasn't spared. His golden retirement fund, quietly siphoned from estate allocations, was locked down pending inquiry. And me? I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I sat back and let gravity do its work. If they couldn't steal, they couldn't breathe. And for once, that wasn't my fault. When the first hearing arrived, the courtroom buzzed with tension, not the loud, chaotic kind. This was quieter, sharper, eyes narrowed, pens ready. I walked in, head high, spine straight. Across from me sat Batya, arms folded like a statue. Sofrona, veiled in widow black, lips tight. Amaranta, still polished, but the cracks around her expression showed. None of them met my eyes. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't perform. I delivered. I listed names, dates, accounts. My attorney pulled up records, forged adjustments, falsified logs, edited timestamps, emails that vanished and were recovered. And Ruth, the janitor from the hospital, walked in with her quiet dignity and shattered whatever hope Sofrona had of playing victim. She told me to clean up the mess. Her words, Ruth said, voice even. But when I saw what it was, I couldn't. Then came the estate accountant, called to the stand with a subpoena. He looked nervous, pale and sweating, but he confirmed it. I was instructed to delay reporting, told it was family business. But what I saw wasn't business. It was theft. Sofrona stood to object, claiming emotional trauma, invoking the sacred name of family. The judge didn't blink. This is not therapy, Mrs. Fairborn. This is justice. Kindly remain seated. By the time the hearing adjourned, the mood had shifted. The judge leaned forward, his voice cutting clean through the silence. There is sufficient cause to proceed. Ms. Dimity Fairborn is hereby granted temporary conservatorship over all disputed estate assets. Full access to records is ordered, without delay or obstruction. For the first time since this began, I felt the weight ease from my shoulders. Just slightly. Not gone, but movable. I walked out of that room not triumphant, but anchored. The fallout came quickly. Sofrona vanished from the public eye. Amaranta locked down her accounts. No more morning yoga reels, no more polished baby bump updates. Silence, the same silence they once forced on me. But Basha, he doubled down, issued a public statement. My daughter has betrayed the very blood that raised her. The media picked it up like wildfire. But for once, the comments weren't siding with him. She exposed corruption. Maybe blood isn't thicker than truth. I stand with Dimity. And beneath it all, messages started trickling in, private ones, friends of the family, neighbors, even distant relatives. I'm sorry I didn't speak up. I saw things. If you need a witness, I'm here. I always knew you were stronger than they gave you credit for. I didn't smile, but I breathed, deep and clear, like someone finally allowed to use their full lungs. That night, Odilia arrived with a manila folder, sealed and locked. Recovered from a backup server, she said. Your mother's final file. Took some digital excavation. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single document, her handwriting unmistakable, deliberate, and signed. This house is yours. This name is yours. Don't let them rewrite it. No flourish, no poetry, just truth in ink. I folded it with care, stared out the window at the streetlight flickering in the distance, and said aloud, to no one in particular, "We're not done. Not yet." The letter sat on my desk, unmoving, yet louder than anything else in the room. I read it again, slowly this time, letting the inked words press their weight into me. My mother's handwriting. Thin strokes, slightly trembling in places, but unwavering. The kind of script that belonged to someone who still believed in clarity, even when the world tried to smear her out of focus. You will never be less than anyone who tried to erase you. That line didn't whisper. It struck, sharp and deliberate. Her letter wasn't sentimental. It wasn't polished like the lies our family wrapped themselves in. It was a manifesto, full of warnings, love, pain, and the quiet kind of pride mothers rarely speak but never stop feeling. I didn't tuck it into a safe. I framed it, right next to my desk, where I made calls, signed forms, started again. It didn't belong in storage. It belonged in sight, not as evidence, as identity. You were right, I murmured. I just didn't want you to be. The phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something in me, instinct, maybe fatigue, answered anyway. Dimity? The voice on the other end was shaky, familiar, tired. Amaranta? I said, careful, alert. I don't know if I should be calling, but I needed to talk. Without lawyers. Without noise. There was silence between us, heavier than any insult she had ever thrown at me. I'm listening, I said. She asked if we could meet. Somewhere neutral. No boardrooms, no cameras. 2 days later, I met her on a bench under an oak tree in Austin's city park. It was early, quiet, the kind of morning that holds its breath. She wore no makeup. Her hair was pulled back, not styled. Her hands trembled when she spoke. They told me you were dangerous, she said. Jealous, unstable, that you wanted to ruin us because you were bitter. I believed them. I believed every word. I didn't interrupt. I just watched her fall apart one sentence at a time. I wanted to hate you, she whispered, because it was easier than asking why everything felt wrong. And then I saw what they'd done, what they covered up, what they used me for. Her voice cracked, raw now. I need to tell you something. Something I never told anyone. She looked up, and I braced myself. The night Mom died, it wasn't just a fall. My breath stilled. I saw it, she continued. I was coming down the hallway. Dad, he pushed her. Not hard, but enough. She stumbled. It wasn't rage. It was cold, like it meant nothing. And when she fell, he just stood there, said it was an accident. I couldn't move, couldn't blink. The air around us buzzed. Sophrona saw me watching, Amaranta said. She pulled me aside, told me to shut up, said if I spoke, it would destroy the family, said Mom was already gone, but we didn't have to destroy what was left. The silence that killed, I muttered. Amaranta nodded, face wet with tears. I've lived with it every single day, but I couldn't carry it anymore, not with the baby coming. I exhaled slowly. My mother hadn't slipped. She hadn't tripped. She'd been erased, with the same carelessness they used on me. You telling me doesn't fix anything, I said, voice even. But it does start something. She nodded. I don't expect forgiveness. I didn't want to be alone with it anymore. I stood up, looked down at her. This woman who had once smiled as she dismissed me from our family like I was bad PR. Now she sat crumbling in the truth I'd lived with for years. I'm not looking for a sister, I said quietly. I'm looking for peace. We didn't hug. There were no dramatic reconciliations. We nodded. Two people untangling threads too knotted to mend. And then I walked away. Later that week, I started decluttering my apartment, not out of trend, but necessity. I boxed up old clothes, sorted documents, shredded years of family records that served no purpose but to haunt. I painted the walls, a soft white, something fresh, something without memory. I changed my bank accounts, set up a new will, booked a meeting with a realtor, and days later, I signed papers for a small home outside Austin. Modest, sunlit, quiet. I was rebuilding, not a legacy, not a name, but a life I could actually live in. In the evenings, I sketched out garden plans on napkins and notebook margins. I wanted to plant apple trees, the same kind we had in the backyard when I was a kid. The ones Mom used to say needed patience and pruning, just like people. You plant what you plan to keep, I wrote in a corner. And I'm keeping me. That night, after filing away the last of my legal drafts, I sat down at my desk with a fresh cup of coffee. My laptop pinged. A new message. Subject line. I'll testify for Mom. It was from Amaranta. I stared at the screen for a long time, unread. There wasn't relief. Not exactly. Not sadness either. It was something quieter. Responsibility, maybe. Or clarity. I took a sip from my mug, looked out at the streetlights just starting to glow against the falling dusk. Then I whispered to no one but myself, "Then let's do this right." I walked into the courtroom that morning holding two things: the files Odelia had prepared and the calm I'd earned. Amaranta was beside me. She wasn't holding my hand. She didn't need to. Her presence said enough. The courtroom was already full. Press lined the back wall, their lenses ready. Relatives I hadn't seen in years sat stiffly in silence. A few old neighbors whispered, their curiosity louder than their mouths. Judge Harmon called us to order. His tone was sharp, controlled. He wasn't interested in theatrics, only facts. Amaranta took the stand without prompting. Her voice shook on the first few lines but steadied as she went on. My father pushed our mother. I saw it. He didn't scream. He didn't panic. He just watched her fall. She paused, then told me to forget it, said it was an accident, that talking would destroy us, that we'd be orphans if I spoke. You could feel the air thin as she continued, line by line, recounting the silence that followed. The secrecy, the conditioning, how Sophrona spun the story, weaponized grief into loyalty. The judge didn't flinch. He turned to me. "Ms. Fairborn, do you have final documentation for submission?" I stood. "Yes, Your Honor." Files include revised estate ledgers, forensic analysis of signature discrepancies, and a copy of my mother's voice recording. He nodded and took his time reviewing. The room was still. When he finally looked up, his verdict came not like thunder, but the drop of a gavel that cut the air clean. This court finds substantial evidence of financial manipulation, fraud, coercion, and credible suspicion of criminal activity. Full estate control is hereby awarded to Ms. Dimity Fairborn. Referrals for criminal investigation are submitted to the District Attorney's Office for both Mr. Baisha Fairborn and Mrs. Sophrona Carrington Fairborn. A soft applause broke out. Not joyous, not celebratory, just release. The kind that sounds like a weight lifted, not a victory claimed. As we exited the courtroom, Sophrona was intercepted. Two plainclothes investigators waiting at the doors. She kept her chin high, but for the first time, she didn't speak. Her silence no longer reigned. Basia tried to leave through the side exit, but the press swarmed like a tide. No one shielded him, no publicist, no lawyer, just him, blinking into the flashbulbs of consequences. I passed Amaranta just outside the courthouse. She stood against the wall, trembling, not from fear this time, just rawness. "You okay?" I asked. She shook her head, then nodded. "No, but I will be." I didn't hug her. I didn't offer pity. Just said, "We chose our paths. I'm glad you finally chose yours." Odelia found me near the parking lot. She didn't say much, just extended her hand. "You didn't just win, you rewrote the ending." That night, back at my apartment, I found the envelope waiting. Odelia had sent it earlier that day, unmarked, discreet. I opened it carefully, recognizing the USB immediately. It held the final file from my mother's private recorder. I sat on my couch, plugged in my laptop, and pressed play. Her voice filled the room, soft, deliberate. "Dimity, if you're hearing this, it means they tried. They always would. You were the strong one, stubborn, yes, but never wrong about who they really were." I froze. "I didn't leave you unprotected. I left you aware." That was all I could give in the end. Tears welled, but didn't fall. Her voice was all I'd wanted, more than any ruling, any inheritance, any revenge. When it ended, I closed my laptop and exhaled. For real this time. Nothing left to prove. A week later, I returned to the house. My mother's house. Now, legally, mine. It looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I was just standing straighter. I walked through each room slowly. Memories didn't jump out. They lingered. Some sweet. Some bitter. But all mine now. The nursery Amaranta once prepped was still untouched. I stood in the doorway a moment, then walked in and peeled the wallpaper away. Beneath it was the original paint, sun-worn, chipped, honest. I painted over it with the same shade my mother used in the living room, then replanted her rose bushes along the fence, dug up the weeds that had smothered them. They still had roots, I said aloud. They just needed space. I didn't sell the house. Not yet. I had plans. Not just for me, but for women who had lived in silence, like I had, who'd been coerced out of homes, inheritances, lives. I'd turn this place into a sanctuary, a legal resource center, a shelter for those too scared to start over. Because starting over wasn't survival, it was defiance. A month later, I hosted a dinner at my new home outside Austin. Nothing fancy, just people who mattered. Odelia, Ashling, Ruth, a few local advocates I'd met since the trial, no speeches. Just real food, soft music, warm air, and laughter that didn't ask permission. No one tiptoed, no one wore masks. The house breathed. That night, I updated my own will, clear, fair, unambiguous, nothing to interpret or manipulate. Then I logged out of the burner email I'd used for months to send anonymous tips, receive confidential documents, stay ahead of threats. I deleted the account. Permanently. I don't need shadows anymore, I whispered. Later, I stood on my porch with a mug of tea, watching the sky turn pink and burnt orange. I thought about everything they said about me, that I was dangerous when I got quiet. They were right. I didn't burn bridges. I lit torches. My phone buzzed once. A message from Amaranta. I named her Lily, Mom's favorite. I didn't reply. I just smiled. Then walked inside and locked the door. Not to keep anyone out, but to finally rest.